All right, so these are your brief history of cell notes. And we'll start with some major players, so some people. So the first person that you should be familiar with is Robert Hooke. For all of these, you don't have to know the dates associated with these discoveries. I would just know the person's name, but do just, have a general sense or appreciation for the time period. So this is the mid 1600s. And this was the first time that we, kind of as a species, were able to see uh, cells, to see dead cells actually in this case, because we had a microscope. And it took us, at this point, we've been around for about 200,000 years. So humans are about 200,000 years old, give or take a couple tens of thousands of years. All of that time, we had no idea cells existed until the 1600s. And the first ones we saw were dead. And Hooke was actually looking at cork cells, and he called them cells because they reminded him of the shape of monk dorms and monasteries. So that's why they are called cells. So cork is actually just bark. It's of a specific type of oak tree, a cork oak tree. And you can farm this. This is like a cork farm. This is made for wine bottles or corks for flasks in chemistry or graduated cylinders or other things. But that's what cork is. That's what he was looking at. Here's his microscope on the left. The picture, and this is kind of our first microscope ever made. The simple, very, very straightforward light microscope. Not not even nearly what you would have in like a biology or a science classroom in school. Ours are much more complicated than this, but it did its job. And what you see on the right is actually a sketch of what he saw. So this is not a picture; it's an artist's sketch. But you can pretty clearly see the different kind of rectangular shapes that he was viewing in what he called cells. All right, a couple years into the future, so Anton von Leeuwenhoek. So Leeuwenhoek is going to make improvements to the light microscope. Again, they don't have electricity; they're just kind of using other sources of light. They're not plugging this thing in, candles and sunlight. But he looked at pond water, drinking water, and was the first person to see living cells. So he was the first to see actual moving living cells, and you could probably imagine how freaked out he was. He was like, "Oh, I gotta tell everyone I saw these little teeny organisms moving around in the water." So he saw things like amoeba here in the middle, and then paramecium here on the right. So these are freshwater paramecium, amoeba. These are both protists. So these are single-celled eukaryotes. They have nucleus and all these other organelles in them, and we'll talk more about the types of cells in a different video. So fast forward a couple hundred years, there were some wars to fight over in Europe. Most of these scientists, actually all the ones in this case, are European so far. So early to mid 1800s, you have Schleiden. So Schleiden essentially looks at thousands and thousands and thousands of plants and hundreds of different species, and he sees all of these cells in all of them. So he basically comes to the conclusion that plants are all made of cells, right? This is coupled with Schwann just the next year, who does something very similar with animal species, and says that all animals are made of cells. And at the time, we didn't really have modern classification for things, so we said, hey, plants and animals are both made of cells, therefore everything is made of cells. All organisms are made of cells, because we didn't really know what fungi were yet. We thought those were just kind of different looking plants. And we thought little teeny microbes in the water were just kind of single-celled animals. So everything at this point was deemed to be made of cells, which they happened to be right, but they kind of were lucky because they weren't right for all of the reasons. They didn't have all the data, but they were kind of right on accident. All right, last major player here is Virchow. Again, 1800s. Virchow is actually going to see mitosis, so he's literally going to see cells dividing under a microscope. And this leads, well, we're going to talk about cell theory in a second, but this leads to the conclusion that all cells come from other cells. we did talk about spontaneous generation earlier, this idea that life can very quickly, in a matter of days, kind of just pop into existence. We know that it takes millions and millions and millions of years for life to evolve. So this is, again, it's another blow to spontaneous generation. It took life on this planet at least 500 million years to evolve. Again, the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and our first evidence of life is about 3.8 billion years ago. So that's about 800 million years of time, and probably there's probably evidence that's even older than that we just haven't found yet. So that's quite a lot of time. It's much different than the kind of 3 weeks that you get for some of this spontaneous generation stuff that we've disproven. All right, so modern cell theory. The first 3 of these are kind of the original cell theory. Again, theories are explanations for sets of data, for facts, for hypotheses, for laws, right? And they do change over time. They get amended, as should all good explanations. So you do have to know these 6. I would, in the back of your mind, just remember that we had to wait for technology. We had to wait for optics and lens technology and light microscopes. Electron microscopes are even bigger microscopes that can see even smaller atoms. You can actually see little teeny organelles and not electrons. Well, yeah, electrons, but I'm talking about animals, so ribosomes and other cell components here. We wouldn't even be able to see a lot of these structures with just a light microscope. And these electron microscopes are hugely expensive. They're tens of thousands of dollars. So the first 3 of these, here we go. All living things are made of cells. Cells are the basic units of living organisms, and new cells come from pre-existing cells. So take a second and see if you can identify the scientists' contributions that went behind those. And you can pause the video too. All right, I gave you some time, so here we go. All living things are made of cells, so that's Schleiden and Schwann, right? Your plants and your animals are all made of cells. Again, they got lucky with that one because they didn't have all the evidence yet. Cells are the basic units of living organisms, and cells come from pre-existing cells. So this third one is Virchow, and the second one is going to be Leeuwenhoek and Hoek. They saw the first living cells. They saw single organisms that were made of single cells, so they are the basic units. So you should see all scientists kind of in these first 3. The next 3 are really from the 1950s onward. It took us another 100+ years after Virchow to figure the rest of this stuff out. But all energy flow occurs within cells. So they're basically talking about metabolism. They're talking about converting glucose to ATP, which is cellular currency for energy. They're talking about photosynthesis and pretty much just any enzymatic-based reaction. All cells, from bacteria to your own, have metabolism and energy flow, right? Cells contain DNA. They contain heredity information that's used to kind of propagate the information from generation to generation, from cell to cell. And cells are basically the same in chemical composition. The chemistry of a bacterial cell, despite how holier than thou we think we tend to be, humans are just another species. We have evolved just like any other species, any other bacteria or plant or fungal species, and we really are chemically the same as pretty much any other organism on this planet. And that is a testament to our shared evolutionary history with all life on Earth. So these are the current 6 tenets of modern cell theory. Of course, things can get amended and tweaked as we learn more, as all good theories do. But you should be responsible for knowing this, and you should be able to see the scientists' contributions that we've talked about in the first 3 parts of this theory in particular. All right, really quick here at the end, and then we're done. Do keep in mind through this entire unit that all the cells that you see, their shape and their function match, right? Cell function and shape follow from each other. So red blood cells are going to have to be smooth and small and flat to fit through your capillaries, which are very, very thin, because they're going to bring oxygen to your cells and CO2 out. Muscle cells are going to be fairly long. They actually have multiple nuclei. They are multinucleated. They are so long, and they have to be able to contract. Neurons, remember, some neurons in your body are feet long, literal feet long. You have neurons that run from the base of your foot all the way up to your spine, and those have to be kind of long and spindly and attached to all these different locations to send signals. Adipose cells, so fat tissue, obviously they're going to store lipids. But all cells are going to have a function, and their shape is going to be related to that function. And we'll talk more about single-celled organisms. These live in water, so these are going to essentially look like torpedoes to minimize resistance and everything. But these are one-celled organisms, which we'll talk about more later on.